well, we're in a crisis. Let's say businesses, leaders they've taken this role, they've stabilized, and now they're ready to start saying, okay, it's going to be a new world out there. We need to start figuring out what is our advantage, what is our new competitive advantage or our new strategic position or whatever coming out of this. And then how do they gradually, because you can't, obviously you're still in a crisis, but you're stabilized. And so then I guess they're gradually moving back into a true leadership role where they're giving people a little bit more leeway to test and learn. And I think that this testing and learning is something that often isn't turned on fast enough, and getting to the point where they can say, okay, now we need to understand there's going to be a new normal out there. We want to take advantage of it faster than our competitors. So test and learn. Let's figure out what it is that's going to bring us this new success coming out of it. Have you seen that as I mean, that's a tough space where you're going to give up the control and the authoritarian side and start telling people, okay, we're going to be fine. Let's start figuring out what it's going to be like out there a few steps down the road.
Well, I mean, I was just thinking that an ultimate test, and it seems to have gone well generally. I say it seems to have gone well. Everybody I've asked, particularly in the banks, has said, oh yeah, it's gone well. I just wonder how true that is, but this is what they're saying. That they're saying that, everybody almost overnight had to go from an office environment to work from home. And so on the one hand, here I am saying you need more control. And on the other hand, everybody got up and left the office. So this was a real test of how you kind of control. And by the way, I now have to put in parenthesis, which I should have said earlier, which is every crisis is different. And there's a danger that you use the skills that you've acquired in the last crisis. And then you simply say, okay, well, I'm a crisis manager, so I'll use the same skills in a new crisis. And if you wanted an example of that, here I am saying you have to bring everything into the center. And at the same time, in this particular crisis, everybody was kind of dispersed to their homes. So actually, I wonder how that trick has been achieved. And I need to do a bit more research because, as I say, almost universally, the people I talk to, the CEOs I talk to, are saying, yes, this happened easily. So every crisis does, show that if you rely on the skills from a previous crisis, you may be wrong-footed. And I think this crisis, where everybody moved immediately to a home working environment, shows that there's some magic that's gone on here, which has allowed crisis managers to hold the control, force people to do things differently. And of course, the situation force people to do things differently. So actually, one of the things that I guess was on their side was that if you had said to them, I bet you in February, if you'd said to these CEOs, what we want you to do is we want you to get 90% of your staff working from home to reduce office costs, there would have been a wall of opposition. There'd be no way could this be done. It's far too difficult. Then the authorities say you can't work in the office, and suddenly everybody's able to manage it. So this has been a different type of crisis. It's kind of brought that to the fore.
So this idea of sending everybody home, I agree with you 100%. If you had said, anytime before March, hey, any business should send 90% of their people home if they don't absolutely have to be in a physical space together, because they could save a bunch of money on office space, it would be an overwhelming resistance, because people would say, well, how do you manage people? How do you keep track of whether they're doing work or not, and so on. And that is that old management model, the hierarchical directive, even the matrix management models are really around how do you distribute work and supervise, versus giving people a standardized work product and saying, listen, this is what we expect. There's a guy named Ricardo Selmer who has a fairly large business in Brazil. And he, when the business was effectively given to him, he, as the CEO, he said, this whole management gig is really kind of a pain in the ass. It would be really great if people could self-organize and self-manage. And they went about standardizing work product for all of their positions. And then they even went as far as to say, listen, overachievers, overperformers cause a problem for the machine as well. So if you're an overperformer, just work 3 days a week instead of 5, because go to the beach for a couple days, because if you do too much, it also causes an anomaly in the system, and that's a problem. And it's really, really interesting, because you think now, obviously you can't micromanage people over Zoom, if people are working apart. And the other thing that I think is really interesting about it, and people tried. So we have one client that was saying, yeah, we're trying to monitor how long people are online on the system so that we can see if they're working or not. But effectively, what everybody's done over this 3 months is understand how to gauge the quality and timeliness of work product. And that's a dramatic change in business.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, and it's taken place in an environment which this was where I was going. It's taken place in Russia, where the absolute natural center of gravity is an authoritarian leadership style, whether that be in society or whether that be in business. And for lots of reasons we can go into if we had the time, but people respond to direction here by saying, tell us what to do and we'll do it. And actually one of the problems that we have in the venture capital industry and in entrepreneurship is how to ensure maximum amount of initiative, maximum amount of self-motivation, and getting people to work in that space. And of course, it's a generational issue. And I think this next generation is far less authoritarian based, but nevertheless, the core of Russian business responds to an authoritarian style of leadership, which during a crisis, of course, is very helpful. Because they're going to respond to what they're being told to do. And so when you have this work from home and it works, it's even more surprising, because it's in this environment that you would have thought wasn't particularly well suited. So yeah, it's been a very interesting period.